The courtroom had seen arrogance before. Judge Judy had stared down spoiled heirs, crooked landlords, cheating husbands, and grown adults who lied so badly they could barely keep their own stories straight. But on this day, the air felt different. It was heavier, sharper. The kind of tension that settles into a room when everyone senses they are about to witness something they will never forget. At the defendant's table sat 18-year-old Britney Holloway, the kind of girl who had spent her whole life confusing attention with importance. Her glossy blonde hair fell in perfect waves over a cream designer blazer. Her nails were manicured to tiny weapons. A diamond bracelet flashed every time she moved her hand, and she moved her hands constantly, not because she was nervous, but because she was irritated. Irritated to be there, irritated to be questioned, irritated that for once in her life, the room was not orbiting around her. She looked less like a teenager facing a legal judgment and more like someone who believed the whole experience was beneath her. She sat with one leg crossed over the other, jaw tilted slightly upward, wearing the expression of a person who had never had to apologize and never expected to start now. Across from her sat 80-year-old Evelyn Harper. Evelyn was small, almost fragile at first glance, dressed in a pale blue cardigan buttoned neatly to the top. Her silver hair was combed carefully back from her face, and her hands rested in her lap with the kind of stillness that comes only from a lifetime of learning how to endure pain without performing it for anyone. Dark glasses covered her eyes. Beside her chair leaned a white cane, its tip worn smooth with use. She did not fidget. She did not posture. She did not attempt to impress anyone. She simply sat there with quiet dignity, as if the courtroom, the cameras, and the entire noise of the world were all just weather passing over stone. And then there was the reason everyone in that room had fallen silent before the case even began. Because 3 weeks earlier, in the parking lot of an upscale California grocery store, Britney Holloway had slapped Evelyn Harper across the face so hard that the old woman fell onto the pavement. What Britney did not know in that moment, what she could not have imagined while standing there in her white SUV, screaming at a blind woman old enough to be her great-grandmother, was that the person she had humiliated in public was carrying a story so devastating, so deeply human, that even Judge Judy would struggle to hold herself together before the day was over. What Britney also didn't know was that the slap itself was only the beginning, because this was not just a case about disrespect. It was not just a case about a cruel teenager with too much privilege and not enough character. And it was not just a case about an 80-year-old blind widow who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hidden behind one impulsive act of cruelty was a chain of lies, deleted messages, witness intimidation, and a family reputation built on the assumption that money could make consequences disappear. By the time the truth finished coming out, Britney's smirk would be gone. Her mother's face would turn white. A packed audience would sit in stunned silence, and Judge Judy, a woman famous for her steel spine and razor-sharp control, would wipe away tears she never expected to shed on national television. But before we get to the moment that broke the courtroom, you need to understand exactly who Britney Holloway was and why she thought she could slap an old blind woman in broad daylight and walk away smiling. Britney was the only daughter of Greg Holloway, a luxury home developer whose name was plastered across gated neighborhoods, golf charity galas, and political fundraiser banners all over Orange County. Her mother, Denise Holloway, ran 3 women's lifestyle boutiques that made less money than her social media account suggested, but that hardly mattered. The Holloways did not live on income. They lived on image, and Britney had been raised like image was everything. At 18, she already had 200,000 followers spread across short-form video platforms, where she posted clips of brunches, shopping sprees, Pilates sessions, and captions about protecting your peace, while service workers in the background cleaned up after her. She filmed in luxury bathrooms. She filmed in hotel lobbies. She filmed in the passenger seat of cars she had not paid for, wearing sunglasses that cost more than some families' monthly rent. Her entire personality had been assembled out of entitlement, expensive lighting, and the unshakable belief that being watched was the same thing as being admired. People online called her iconic. People in her real life used a different word, cruel. Former classmates described her as the kind of girl who never bullied loudly enough to get suspended, but always loudly enough to leave damage. She mocked accents. She laughed at thrift store clothes. She once posted a story from a restaurant mocking an elderly waiter's trembling hands as he poured water. When a classmate called her out, Britney replied with 6 words that had become her unofficial life philosophy: "If they're weak, that's not my fault." The Holloways handled scandals the same way they handled landscaping around their mansion, by covering what looked ugly from the street. A deleted post, a quiet phone call, a check sent to the right person, a private apology delivered through an assistant instead of sincerity. Britney had learned early that embarrassment was temporary, but money was useful, and that lesson calcified into something dangerous by the time she finished high school. Because once someone grows up seeing consequences erased over and over again, they stop believing consequences are real. Evelyn Harper's life could not have been more different. She was born in 1946 in a 1-bedroom apartment over a hardware store in Bakersfield. Her father repaired radios. Her mother sewed clothes for church families who could not afford store-bought dresses. Evelyn became a school librarian in her 20s, married a fire captain named Thomas Harper in her 30s, and spent the next 4 decades living a life so ordinary, so gentle, and so quietly good that most people would never notice how much strength it required. She and Thomas had one daughter, Rebecca, who became a nurse. They lived modestly, saved carefully, and never asked anyone for anything they could do themselves. For 42 years, Evelyn volunteered at children's reading centers. She organized donated books. She repaired torn covers by hand. She read aloud to kids whose parents worked late. She remembered birthdays. She wrote thank you notes. She baked lemon bread for neighbors whose names nobody else bothered to learn. Then life, in the cruel and efficient way it sometimes works, began taking pieces of her. Thomas died first, after a warehouse fire left him with lung damage that never fully healed. Rebecca died 6 years later from an aggressive illness that moved faster than hope. And Evelyn lost her eyesight gradually, the world fading not in one dramatic moment, but in tiny betrayals. Blurred print, dimmed edges, shadows where faces should have been, until glaucoma finally took what little remained. By 78, she was alone in a small rent-controlled apartment with a radio, a shelf of Braille books, and a golden retriever service dog named Maple, who had become her steady companion in a world she could no longer see. But even then, she never became bitter. She volunteered by phone for a grief support line. She recorded Braille-friendly audiobooks for visually impaired children. She sent handwritten cards, traced carefully with magnifying tools before her vision vanished completely, to the families of firefighters killed in service, because she knew what widowhood felt like when the casseroles stopped coming and the silence got loud. That was the woman Britney Holloway slapped, and the incident that brought them together was almost too petty to believe. It happened on a warm Thursday afternoon outside Marston's Market, a polished grocery store in Newport Beach where the produce was arranged like art and the parking lot looked cleaner than most hospitals. Evelyn had taken a rideshare there to pick up prescription medication and a few groceries. Maple guided her carefully from the curb. In one hand she carried her cane, in the other, a cloth bag with a short list written in raised lettering. At nearly the same time, Britney pulled into the loading zone in a white Range Rover that technically belonged to her mother but was referred to online as My Baby. She had just finished filming a skincare sponsorship and was already angry because the morning's post had underperformed. She was on speakerphone with a friend, complaining loudly about old people moving like broken furniture, when she spotted Evelyn stepping carefully across the striped access lane near the disabled parking spaces. What happened next would later be described by witnesses in slightly different words, but the shape of it never changed. Britney wanted the lane clear immediately. Evelyn, unable to see the vehicle and trying to orient herself through sound, paused for a second too long, and Britney exploded. At first it was verbal, sharp, public, mean for the pleasure of being mean. Move, then louder. Oh my God, are you serious? Witnesses said Britney slammed her car door and marched forward in heeled sandals, phone still in hand, face twisted with the outrage of someone who felt personally attacked by inconvenience. Evelyn turned toward the voice, confused, apologizing instantly in the gentle, reflexive tone of people who have spent their whole lives trying not to trouble others. "I'm sorry, dear," she said. "I didn't realize." That should have been the end of it. But cruelty doesn't need a reason. Only an opening. Britney got close enough to see the cane, close enough to notice Maple's harness, close enough to understand, beyond any doubt, that the woman in front of her was blind. and instead of backing off, she leaned in. Witness number 1, a college student waiting near the cart return, would later say Britney laughed first. Not a nervous laugh, not an embarrassed laugh, a contemptuous laugh. Then came the sentence that froze the whole scene. If you can't see, maybe you shouldn't be outside. Evelyn flinched. Maple shifted. A man unloading groceries looked up. Then Britney grabbed the older woman's forearm, not to help, to shove. Evelyn lost her balance for a second, one foot slipping sideways against the painted curb line. She steadied herself with the cane, visibly shaken, and said quietly, "Please don't touch me." And something in Britney seemed to snap at being told no by someone she considered beneath her. In one fast, ugly motion, she raised her hand and slapped Evelyn across the face. The sound cracked through the parking lot. Not loud like an explosion, worse, loud like skin, loud like shock. Evelyn's glasses flew sideways. Her cane clattered to the ground. Maple barked and jerked forward as the old woman stumbled backward, missed the curb, and hit the pavement hard enough that the back of her hand split open against the concrete. The entire parking lot seemed to inhale at once. For 1 second, nobody moved, because sometimes cruelty is so sudden, so naked, that the human mind rejects it before the body reacts. Then, everything happened at once. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a grocery bag and oranges rolled under a car. A teenager started recording. 2 men ran over. Maple stood over Evelyn, barking frantically, while the old woman tried to push herself up with trembling hands, blood visible along her knuckles, her cheek already reddening. And Britney? Britney stepped back, stared for half a second, and did the worst possible thing. She rolled her eyes. Not panic, not regret. Annoyance. As if the blind 80-year-old woman bleeding on the pavement had somehow created an inconvenience for her. A witness named Paula Medina, a retired nurse, was the first to reach Evelyn. She knelt down, asked if she could touch her, then helped support her shoulders, while another shopper retrieved the cane, and someone else held Maple's harness. Paula would later testify that Evelyn kept apologizing. The woman who had just been slapped to the ground kept whispering, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be in the way." That detail would stay in Judge Judy's mind long after the case ended, because there is something uniquely heartbreaking about innocent people apologizing while being abused. Meanwhile, Britney was already trying to regain control of the narrative. Witnesses heard her say Evelyn had grabbed her first. Security footage would later make that lie impossible. But in the moment, Britney said it with the confidence of a person who had lied before and been believed. She claimed the old woman had scratched her arm. She said Maple had lunged. She said she reacted in fear. She said a lot of things, all of them false. Then, according to 2 separate witnesses, she bent down, picked up Evelyn's fallen glasses, and instead of handing them back, tossed them onto the passenger seat of her SUV like trash. That detail did not make it into Britney's first statement to police. Neither did the video she deleted from her phone, because yes, and this is where the case began turning from ugly to sinister, Britney had been filming, not the whole thing, but enough. She had started recording when she got out of the car, apparently intending to mock Evelyn for contempt the same way she had mocked workers, strangers, and service employees before. Part of that recording captured Britney's own voice saying, "Are you blind or just stupid?" followed by laughter, movement, and then the sharp sound of impact. The original clip was deleted 8 minutes later. Britney would later say she deleted it because she was overwhelmed. Digital recovery would suggest a different reason. Police were called. Ambulance services checked Evelyn for a concussion and a sprained wrist. She refused hospital transport at first because she was worried about Maple and because older people from another era often minimize their own pain out of habit. Eventually, after Paula Medina insisted and a paramedic noticed swelling near the wrist, Evelyn agreed to be taken for evaluation. Britney did not go with remorse, she went with performance. By the time officers started taking statements, her mother Denise had already arrived, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying the kind of expensive leather bag that signals someone used to entering crises as if they are social appointments. Greg Holloway came 10 minutes later, furious not at what his daughter had done, but at the fact that witnesses were still present. He did not ask whether Evelyn was all right. He asked who was recording. That alone told the whole story. Within hours, the Holloway family attorney had contacted the store. Within 24 hours, friendly calls had been placed. Within 48 hours, the Holloways were privately describing the incident as an unfortunate misunderstanding involving a distressed senior and a startled young woman. A distressed senior, a startled young woman. That was the official sanitizing language chosen for a blind widow who had been slapped down in a parking lot by an 18-year-old influencer in designer shoes. If the story had ended there, it would still have been shameful. But then more began surfacing. A second video from a different angle, text messages Britney sent afterward, and one particular voice memo that would later make the entire courtroom go cold. At first, Evelyn did not want to sue. That shocked people who only understand justice as revenge. But Evelyn was not built that way. She told Paula from the emergency room that she did not want to ruin a young girl's life over one terrible choice. She said anger had already taken enough from the world. She said maybe the girl would apologize. Maybe if she understood what she had done, something good could still come from it. That was Evelyn Harper, still protecting the feelings of the person who hurt her. But there was no apology, not from Britney, not from her parents, not from anyone. Instead, 3 days after the incident, Evelyn received a letter from the Holloway's attorney suggesting that if she continued circulating exaggerated claims about the event, the family would consider legal action for defamation. Defamation against a blind 80-year-old widow with a sprained wrist, a bruised cheek, and 6 witnesses. That was the moment Evelyn stopped hoping for kindness and started looking for truth. A family friend connected her with a legal aid group. The videos were preserved. Witness statements were collected. Paula Medina agreed to testify. So did the college student from the cart return. So did a grocery clerk who had come outside right after the slap and heard Britney say, "She touched me first, so who cares?" Then the case landed in front of Judge Judy. And if Britney had done even basic research, she would have known that arrogance is gasoline in that courtroom, especially arrogance directed at the elderly, at the vulnerable, at people who carry themselves with more grace than their abusers could ever imitate. Still, Britney showed up like she was attending a panel discussion she had graciously agreed to bless with her presence. She arrived in a beige blazer, pearl earrings, and the face of someone convinced that adulthood could be faked through accessories. Her mother sat behind her in the audience, rigid and overstyled, clutching her handbag like a flotation device. Her father, who had initially insisted on attending, was not there. Rumor was, he had been advised that his visible anger and history of intimidating behavior would not play well on camera. So Denise came alone, prepared to glare on behalf of the family. Evelyn entered slowly with Maple and a court assistant guiding her to the table. The whole room shifted when they saw her, not because she sought sympathy, quite the opposite. There was something devastating about how small she looked in that enormous space, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, as if orienting herself by touch in a room built for spectacle. Judge Judy watched everything, the posture, the attitude, the silence. She noticed Britney didn't stand quickly enough. She noticed Denise whispering before the case even began. She noticed Evelyn thanking the assistant who seated her, and when the introductions were finished, Judge Judy leaned forward, fixed Britney with a stare that had ended 1,000 bad performances before, and asked the first question. Did you slap this woman? Not, did an incident occur? Not, is there a dispute over contact? Straight to the point. Britney adjusted her sleeve and sighed softly, like the question itself was unsophisticated. I reacted after she grabbed me. Judge Judy didn't blink. That wasn't my question. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of Britney's mouth, the kind of smile spoiled people use when they think technical wording is a path out of moral accountability. I made contact, yes, the audience murmured. Judge Judy's face hardened. You made contact? This isn't a football game. Did you slap an 80-year-old blind woman? This time Britney shifted in her seat. Yes, but no, Judge Judy snapped. There is no but after that sentence that helps you. And just like that, the temperature in the room changed. Because Britney had expected a conversation, Judge Judy was preparing an excavation. If Britney Holloway had any instinct for self-preservation, this would have been the moment to find it. Instead, she straightened her back, lifted her chin half an inch higher, and did what overconfident people always do when the ground starts shifting beneath them. She doubled down. It wasn't unprovoked, she said. She was disoriented and came toward me aggressively, and I was startled. There it was, not remorse, not shame. A teenager in a cream blazer describing a blind 80-year-old widow as an aggressor. The audience made a sound somewhere between disbelief and disgust. Denise Holloway immediately leaned forward in her seat, as if her daughter had said something intelligent. Judge Judy held up one finger without even turning her head. Silence. Then she looked at Britney again. "You're telling me," Judge Judy said slowly, each word clipped and precise, "that this 80-year-old blind woman, with a cane and a service dog, launched some kind of attack on you in a grocery store parking lot." Britney hesitated just long enough to understand how absurd it sounded, but not long enough to stop herself. "She grabbed my arm." Judge Judy turned to Evelyn. "Mrs. Harper, did you touch her?" Evelyn's voice came soft, careful, almost apologetic by habit. "I may have reached out when I heard someone close to me, Your Honor. I couldn't see where she was. But I did not grab her. I said I was sorry." That word again. Sorry. Judge Judy's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for anyone paying attention to realize she had already started forming an opinion that Britney was not going to enjoy. She looked down at the file in front of her, then back up. "And after this alleged grabbing, your solution was to slap her in the face hard enough to knock her to the ground." "I didn't mean for her to fall," Britney muttered. Judge Judy pounced immediately. "That's not what I asked either. You seem to have a little problem with answering the actual question in front of you." Britney's jaw flexed. "I reacted." Judge Judy sat back. "Reaction is touching a hot stove and pulling your hand away. What you did was assault." Denise made the mistake of speaking. "She's 18, Judge." She panicked. Judge Judy turned that famous stare toward the audience with such force that Denise visibly recoiled before a single word was spoken. "I did not ask you a thing." The courtroom went dead silent. Denise folded her lips together and looked down. Judge Judy returned to Britney. "You're legally an adult. Old enough to drive a luxury SUV, old enough to post your entire life online, old enough to put on makeup and play sophisticated, old enough to slap somebody in public, then you are old enough to face what comes after." For the first time since entering the courtroom, Britney's expression lost a little color. Judge Judy motioned toward Evelyn. "Mrs. Harper, tell me what happened in your own words. Start from when you got out of the rideshare." Evelyn placed both hands gently on the table, fingertips resting on the polished wood, as if anchoring herself to the sound of the room. "I went to pick up my prescriptions and a few groceries," she began. "Maple guided me toward the entrance. I heard a car door slam. Then I heard a young woman yelling. I turned toward the voice because I wasn't sure if she was talking to me. I said I was sorry. I always say I'm sorry when I think I may be in someone's way." She gave the smallest, saddest smile. "I suppose I've been saying that a lot since I lost my sight." Something in the room shifted, not just sympathy, recognition, because everyone there suddenly understood that Evelyn Harper was one of those people who had spent a lifetime making themselves smaller so the world could remain comfortable around them. Judge Judy's voice softened. "How long have you been blind?" "Completely blind for 2 years. Before that it was gradual." "And did you know who she was?" "No, ma'am." "Did you threaten her?" "No." "Did you hit her?" "No." "Did you curse at her?" "No." Evelyn swallowed. "I just asked her not to touch me." A murmur ran through the audience again. Judge Judy glanced toward Britney like a blade turning in the light. "And that was enough to set you off?" Britney folded her arms. "You're making it sound worse than it was." Several people gasped out loud. Judge Judy's eyebrows rose. "Worse than slapping a blind old woman onto concrete? I'd love to hear how you think I'm exaggerating." Britney opened her mouth, closed it, then did the one thing spoiled people often do when facts start cornering them. She tried to pivot into victimhood. "My life has been destroyed over this. People online are threatening me. They posted my address. I lost brand deals. Nobody cares what this has done to me." It was such a breathtakingly selfish sentence that even Denise looked uneasy hearing it spoken aloud. Judge Judy leaned forward. You really want to go there? Britney said nothing. Good. Let's go there. Judge Judy lifted a sheet from the file. You lost sponsorships because companies don't want to attach their products to somebody caught assaulting a disabled senior citizen. That's not persecution. That's the free market having better judgment than you. A few people in the audience tried not to smile. Judge Judy continued. And if your first instinct after publicly humiliating an elderly blind woman is to center yourself, then this courtroom is about to be a very educational experience. Then she turned to plaintiff's counsel liaison and said the words Britney clearly had not prepared for. Let's see the video. The monitor flickered on. Every eye in that room shifted toward it. The recovered footage was not long, 23 seconds, but it was more than enough. The clip began shakily, vertical phone framing, with Britney's own voice off camera and laughing. Are you blind or just stupid? There was movement. The image tilted. Maple's harness flashed across the frame. Evelyn's voice, faint and confused. I'm sorry, dear, I didn't. Then Britney stepped into view for half a second. Perfect hair, irritated face, arm lifting. The sound came next. A crack, a shout, the camera whipping sideways as Evelyn fell out of frame. Gasps filled the courtroom. On the video, Britney's voice could still be heard after the fall. Oh my God, are you kidding me? Not, are you okay? Not, someone help her. Are you kidding me? The video ended. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Britney stared at the screen like it had betrayed her personally. Denise had gone pale beneath her foundation. Judge Judy let the silence sit. She understood something most people never learn. Silence, used correctly, can be more humiliating than yelling. Finally, she said, would you like to explain how that supports your story? Britney swallowed. It doesn't show everything. Judge Judy's head tilted. Ah, the universal anthem of liars everywhere. I'm not lying. Judge Judy's voice sharpened instantly. Don't shout at me. You're in enough trouble already. Britney's hands were trembling now, though she tucked them under the table quickly, hoping no one noticed. Judge Judy wasn't finished. Now let's move to what happened afterward because for a brief second I considered the possibility that this was an ugly, isolated act of immaturity. Then I read your messages. A court officer handed over printed exhibits. Judge Judy read aloud. Text message from defendant to contact listed as Maddie Pilates. LOL, old lady ate pavement. If she sues, Dad will bury it. The courtroom erupted. A loud collective intake of horror, followed by whispers that broke into open outrage. Britney's face drained completely. That's out of context. Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision. There is no context on earth in which that message improves. Another page. Second message, same day, 27 minutes later. Delete anything if you recorded. She was blind, so she can't ID me anyway. Denise covered her mouth. Britney's voice came thin now, stripped of polish. I was freaking out. Judge Judy slammed the paper down. No, you were calculating. That landed. You could see it land. Because Britney had spent her whole life surviving on the idea that if she cried at the right moment, or smiled at the right man, or said the right softened version of a terrible thing, adults would translate her cruelty into confusion. Judge Judy was not translating. She was reading the original language. Then came witness testimony. Paula Medina took the stand first, dignified and steady, the kind of woman whose credibility radiated before she even opened her mouth. She described seeing Evelyn on the ground, described the blood on her hand, described Maple trying to protect her, described Britney standing there irritated instead of alarmed. Then Paula said the sentence that made even the bailiff look down for a second. She kept apologizing while she was bleeding. She thought she had done something wrong by existing in the same space as that girl. The room went quiet again. Judge Judy looked toward Evelyn. Evelyn lowered her head slightly, embarrassed by the attention, which somehow made it worse. The next witness, Miguel Santos, the college student from the cart return, confirmed that Britney had been filming before the slap and that he heard her say, "If you can't see, maybe you shouldn't be outside." Then came the grocery clerk, then the store security supervisor. then the digital forensics specialist, a calm man in glasses, who explained how deleted data from Britney's device had been partially recovered and authenticated. He testified that the video had been deleted 8 minutes after the incident and that a voice memo recorded later that afternoon had also been retrieved from cloud backup metadata. Judge Judy steepled her fingers. "Play it." The sound file began. At first it was rustling, car doors, engine noise. Then Britney's voice, lower and angrier than it had been in court. "This is so stupid. Mom, I don't care if she's blind. She was in my way. People like that milk everything. If they want respect, they should stop acting helpless." You could hear Denise's voice in the background, hushed and urgent. "Britney, stop talking. Your phone records everything." Then Britney again. "Whatever. Dad will handle it. He always does." The clip ended. This time there was no murmur, just silence. The kind that feels almost spiritual. Judge Judy took off her glasses. That alone sent a visible ripple through the room because everyone understood instinctively that the case had just crossed from ugly into unforgettable. She looked at Britney for a long moment, then at Denise, then back at Britney. "You know," Judge Judy said, voice lower now, more dangerous because it no longer needed volume, "every once in a while somebody walks in here and reminds me how quickly money can rot character when parents mistake indulgence for love." Denise looked like she wanted to object, but survival finally overruled vanity. She stayed quiet. Judge Judy continued, "You weren't startled. You weren't defending yourself. You were annoyed by vulnerability. That woman's blindness offended your convenience, so you punished her for it." Britney's eyes filled, but they were not the right tears. Not grief. Not remorse. The hot, humiliated tears of someone realizing status had stopped working. Evelyn was asked if she wanted to say anything further before damages were discussed. Most people in her position would have aimed for righteous anger. The audience would have understood it. Judge Judy certainly would have allowed it, but Evelyn Harper did something infinitely more devastating. She spoke gently. "I don't hate her." Britney looked up, startled. "I was frightened," Evelyn said. "And I was hurt. My wrist still aches when I pour tea. My cheek was bruised for days. I have had trouble sleeping since then, because falling when you cannot see it changes something inside you. It makes the world feel less solid." Her fingers trembled once, then stilled. "But I don't hate her." Judge Judy's expression softened again. "Why not?" Evelyn took a breath. "Because hate is expensive at my age, and I don't have much life left to waste on it." There was an audible sound somewhere in the audience, someone trying not to cry and failing. Evelyn went on. "My daughter used to be a nurse. She believed very strongly that pain travels unless someone decides to stop carrying it forward. I tried to remember that." Then her voice wavered for the first time. "But what troubled me most wasn't being slapped. It was hearing that young lady speak as if a blind old woman was less human because she moved slowly. My husband was a firefighter. My daughter spent her life caring for strangers. I worked in libraries with children for 40 years. I know this country is capable of kindness. I know people can be tired and rude and thoughtless, but contempt." She paused. "Contempt for the weak frightens me more than violence. Violence can be punished. Contempt gets taught." That was the sentence. That was the one. Something in Judge Judy broke open behind the eyes. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't sob. She didn't lose control. But she blinked hard, looked down, reached for a tissue. The entire courtroom saw it. The legendary judge, the woman who had spent decades reducing liars and bullies to dust with nothing but timing and truth, was fighting tears because an 80-year-old blind widow had just explained the moral center of the entire case more clearly than any lawyer could. Judge Judy dabbed beneath one eye and took a breath. "Mrs. Harper," she said quietly, "your daughter raised you well." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I raised her, actually." For the first time all day, a soft, broken little laugh moved through the room, carrying grief inside it. Judge Judy smiled too, briefly, then gathered herself. "Well," she said, voice recovering its edge, "she clearly returned the favor." Even Britney looked shaken now, though whether from guilt or the horror of being in a room where everyone suddenly understood how small she was, no one could say. Judge Judy turned back to the evidence. Medical bills. therapy expenses related to post-fall anxiety and mobility fear, replacement costs for damaged glasses, transportation costs, pain and suffering within the limits permitted. Then she addressed Britney directly. "I want you to look at Mrs. Harper." Britney didn't move. Judge Judy's tone snapped like a whip. "Look at her." Slowly, Britney turned. Evelyn faced forward, unable to see the girl who had hit her, which somehow made the moment even harder to bear. Judge Judy spoke with devastating calm. "She cannot see your face. She never saw your expensive clothes, your perfect makeup, your bracelet, your shoes, any of the nonsense you've built your identity around. She met you without the packaging, and what she experienced was exactly who you are when appearance is stripped away." Britney began crying in earnest now, shoulders shaking. Too late. Judge Judy was not interested in a performance delayed until after digital evidence. "You want to know what I think?" Judge Judy said. "I think your parents spent years insulating you from shame, and now shame feels like persecution. I think you have mistaken being admired online for being decent in real life. I think you are emotionally lazy, morally underdeveloped, and profoundly unprepared for adulthood." Denise finally whispered. Judge Judy cut her down without even raising her voice. "No, you had 18 years. Sit there and hear this." Denise froze. Judge Judy continued. "This case is not just about a slap. It's about what happens when cruelty gets rewarded with excuses. Every deleted message, every lie, every phone call your family made afterward says the same thing. Nobody in your world expected you to answer for what you did. Well, welcome to a different world." She picked up her pen. "Judgment time. On the issue of liability, there is none to debate. You intentionally struck an 80-year-old blind woman, causing her to fall and suffer physical injury, emotional distress, and ongoing fear. Your claim of self-defense is ridiculous, unsupported by the evidence, contradicted by your own recording, contradicted by witness testimony, contradicted by your text messages, and contradicted by the appalling voice memo you were foolish enough to leave on your phone." Britney buried her face in her hands. Judge Judy didn't stop. "I award Mrs. Evelyn Harper the maximum allowable damages in this court. Full medical reimbursement, replacement property costs, transportation expenses, and pain and suffering up to the jurisdictional limit." She wrote the figure, then looked up again. "But I'm not finished." A jolt went through the room. Because when Judge Judy says that, destruction usually follows. "I am also directing that a copy of these proceedings, including the recovered media and statements suggesting possible witness tampering and evidence deletion, be made available to the proper authorities for review. Civil court is not criminal court, but I don't ignore obstruction when it lands gift-wrapped on my desk." Greg Holloway was not in the courtroom, but his absence suddenly felt very present. Denise stared ahead like stone. Britney looked up in panic. "What does that mean?" Judge Judy's answer was ice. "It means your last name is not a legal defense." Then came the part nobody expected. Judge Judy set the pen down. "Mrs. Harper, I understand from your filed materials that you volunteer with a literacy program for visually impaired children." Evelyn nodded. "Yes." Judge Judy turned to Britney. "Do you know what Braille books cost? Do you know how hard accessible educational materials are to fund? Of course you don't. Your world appears to contain only mirrors." The audience was silent again, hanging on every word. "I cannot order character. If I could, I'd have done it years ago for half the people who come in here. But I can tell you this, if there is a single functioning moral instinct left in you, you will spend the next year doing something useful for people you were apparently raised to look down on." Britney's crying quieted, replaced by stunned stillness. "You will volunteer," Judge Judy said. "Not for cameras, not for college applications, not for content. Quietly, consistently. Somewhere no one cares who your father is, somewhere your manicure is irrelevant and your attitude is worthless." That wasn't technically part of the legal judgment. Everyone knew that. But it carried more force than any statute. Because it was the first honest instruction Britney Holloway had probably ever received in her life. Then Judge Judy turned to Evelyn one last time. "You came in here asking for accountability. You conducted yourself with more grace than this defendant deserves, and more dignity than many people twice your age ever manage. I am very sorry for what happened to you." Evelyn lowered her head. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Judy paused. Then, in a move so rare that people in the courtroom would later describe it in hushed voices like they were talking about a historical event, she stepped down from the bench. No cameras needed to dramatize it. The room itself became the drama. Judge Judy walked over to Evelyn Harper, placed a hand lightly over hers, and said something too softly for the microphones to catch. Evelyn smiled through tears. Maple rested his head against her knee. Across the room, Britney cried harder. Not because sympathy had suddenly bloomed in her chest, but because in that moment she understood something worse than punishment. She understood that she had made herself the smallest person in a room full of ordinary people, and no amount of money, followers, tailoring, or family influence could resize her. The hearing ended, but the story didn't, because once the footage aired, it spread like wildfire. The recovered clip, the text messages, the voice memo, Judge Judy's visible tears, Evelyn's line about contempt being taught. Within hours, millions of people were sharing the segment. Not because audiences enjoy cruelty, though some certainly feed on spectacle, but because every now and then a case becomes larger than the individuals in it. It becomes symbolic, a mirror held up to a culture addicted to image and increasingly careless with empathy. Commentators called it one of the most emotionally devastating moments ever seen in a courtroom show. Disability rights advocates began circulating Evelyn's testimony in full, especially the part where she said violence can be punished but contempt gets taught. Teachers quoted it, clergy quoted it, therapists quoted it. Parents posted it beside photos of their children with captions about the kind of adults they were trying to raise, and people who had spent years swallowing humiliation in silence. Elderly people dismissed in public, disabled people mocked for moving slowly, service workers degraded by rich customers, widows treated like furniture, saw something in Evelyn they recognized. Not weakness, not fragility, moral clarity. As for Britney Holloway, consequences finally stopped being theoretical. Several sponsorships terminated their agreements outright. A private university that had been reviewing her late application quietly closed the file. A charity gala board removed Denise Holloway from an honorary planning position after clips of the courtroom aired. Greg Holloway's company denied involvement in any post-incident pressure campaign, but internal emails leaked within a month suggested otherwise, triggering scrutiny he had spent years learning how to avoid. For the first time in Britney's life, the machine around her could not make the problem vanish, because the internet may forgive almost anything if the person is attractive enough, rich enough, or strategic enough. But there are some images too ugly to rebrand. An influencer slapping a blind old woman to the pavement was one of them. And Evelyn? Evelyn did what truly dignified people always do after chaos. She went home, not to capitalize on attention, not to sell interviews, not to build a platform. She returned to her apartment, fed Maple, called the grief support center to say she'd miss one shift because court had run long, and then asked a neighbor to help her sort the cards that had already begun arriving from strangers all over the country. Some included donations, some included apologies on behalf of humanity, some included stories from people who had their own Britney once, a cruel boss, a mocking daughter, a wealthy customer, a dismissive nephew, and who said watching Evelyn stay soft without surrendering truth had reminded them that dignity is not passivity. Dignity is strength under control. A nonprofit for accessible reading materials later asked whether Evelyn would allow her name to be used for a literacy fund serving blind and visually impaired children. She said yes, but only if the focus stayed on the children. Of course she did. That was who she was. A woman who had every reason to harden and somehow remained tender without becoming weak. Months later, one of the production assistants from the show would say that what stayed with her was not the slap or even the verdict. It was the contrast. One woman had youth, beauty, money, visibility, and every social advantage modern life knows how to worship. The other had age, grief, blindness, a cane, and a service dog. And yet when the room had to decide who possessed true stature, true presence, true power, it was never close. Because power is not volume, power is not luxury, power is not the ability to humiliate the vulnerable and expect escape routes. Power is a blind 80-year-old widow sitting upright in court, refusing hatred, telling the truth in a shaking voice, and making a legendary judge cry without ever once asking for sympathy. And that is why the case lasted, not as gossip, not as entertainment, as a warning to every parent who mistakes indulgence for love, to every young person learning arrogance from applause, to every adult who thinks cruelty gets smaller if you dress it well, and to every decent person who has ever been made to feel inconvenient by a louder, richer, uglier soul. The world notices more than it seems. Truth waits longer than we want. And character always speaks eventually, especially when excuses stop talking. By the end of that day, Britney Holloway had lost far more than a case. She lost the protective illusion that money could bleach out meanness. She lost the family myth that public image mattered more than private conduct. And most of all, she lost the luxury of not knowing who she had become. Evelyn Harper lost something too. A little more trust in the safety of ordinary places. A little more ease in the simple act of crossing a parking lot that cannot be measured by checks or court forms or even verdicts. But she also gained something that cruelty never anticipates. Witnesses, not just the people in the lot, not just the people in the courtroom. Millions of people who saw her, heard her, and understood that grace is not surrender, forgiveness is not weakness, and old age does not make a person disposable. If Britney ever became a better human being after that day, it would not be because she was humiliated on television. It would be because, for one impossible hour, she was forced to sit in front of the very kind of person she had dismissed all her life and discover that moral authority does not care about followers, family money, or curated appearances. It cares about what remains when nobody is impressed. And what remained of Evelyn Harper was humanity. What remained of Britney Holloway was a lesson, a brutal one, a necessary one, and one that Judge Judy, through tears she never meant to show, made absolutely unforgettable.